welcome to our Sabbath school time again. We appreciate you being able to just come back and share. And as you have noticed throughout the, particularly since Donna's taken over actually, almost every week there's a focus on the mission of the church and the offering. And I've gone back to the early mission. And we're going to have a look at that, just continue a talk that I started once before. Let's just bow our heads now and we'll have a moment of prayer. Father in heaven, as we just gather to share together, we are grateful for this Sabbath school time. When our early pioneers set this up as an important feature of the day of worship, when the Sabbath school, when they could come together, study together the open word and just share in that way, and also through the focus of mission on the mission of the church. And as we continue to do that through the focus that we give from week to week, and also in the giving of our offerings, in the prayers that we offer for our people who work in difficult parts of the world, I just pray, Lord, that you would continue to be with them as they go about the mission of the church. May we all realise that we too are in a place of mission, and that we can work for you and share our faith with our neighbours and those that we rub shoulders with during the week. So Lord, I just pray that you would be with us during this time, be with the children's divisions, be with our world Sabbath school. May it continue to be a blessing to our church and now to us as individuals as we contemplate our thoughts here. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. And how you going, Jared? Do you reckon you're getting there? Just in case, I'll just load up my PowerPoint, so at least I've got something to look at, and that'll just remind me of where we're going. Oh, it's there as well? All right, okay. Okie doke. Jared's got every computer loaded up with it, so thanks, Jared. That's good. And to forward is just a down arrow. Righto. Okay, so you may remember last quarter, I introduced to you the mission of the church when the first Adventist arrived here in Australia back in 1885, and I focused on the first 15 years, which primarily was in Melbourne. And we talked about, the first Sabbath school, and we showed, illustrations from that Sabbath school and some of the things they did, their growth, etc. And what I wanted to do today was just quickly, I wanted to finish off what we didn't quite have time to do then, and then I want to bring us to the next focus of what was the religious climate that the church actually arrived in, and try and see that some things helped, a couple of things made it difficult for them, but that's what we want to have a look at as we move into this today. So, first of all, one of the things I wanted to continue showing you was that in the years following that first Sabbath school in June 1885, just try and get the date in mind, 1885, just a handful of, 5 missionaries, 2 wives and 4 children came in that group of 11 that attended that first Sabbath school. And from there on, every week the numbers kept growing and growing and growing. And one of the things I was going to show to you was some minutes that showed 18 months after they had started, the membership had gone to, and I can see this now, I can go down and look at this. The membership by January 1887 was 93 members in the Sabbath school. All right? So it grew relatively quickly. That's just 18 months. The membership just began to grow. And as we continue looking at what happened, for example, the next year, the Bible Echo, and I had some photos here to show you of the old building that was hired, and they began to print. And one of the magazines was the weekly Bible Echo magazine, probably equivalent today what we might call the Record, but it was more a PR. It was a thing to give out, to tell people what the Adventist church was doing and what was happening and what they could attend, etc. So the Bible Echo became a significant part of that Bible Echo program before they moved to Warburton to become the Science Publishing Company. But there was a couple of other magazines that are going to be important in our talk a little bit later on that they also started printing during this time. One was called The Australian. Later they called it The Southern Australian. And then another one was called Herald of Liberty. And those last two magazines particularly became helpful in a very significant event that happened in 1900, in fact January 1, 1901, one day beyond what I'm putting in as our parameter here, and that was Federation. These magazines had a big impact on the Constitution that went to Federation. You might say, what? The Adventists did have an impact on that? We did. We actually changed the direction of us actually becoming a country that was governed, or not governed by, but was influenced and controlled by a state church. Come to that in a minute. Okay, let me just go on then. In the next decade, in the 90s, 1890s, of course, the other institution that came very important, connected with that publishing one, was the Tract Society. And it's a cute-looking building that they hired out again for this, the Australasian Tract Society. But it all showed that the growth of the church was really taking on. Another one here, I was going to show you that in the date of 1888, in August of that year, they had been meeting by this stage in a temperance society hall. And it was in August that they were officially organising the first conference in Australia, first conference in the Southern Hemisphere. And so at that particular date, amongst the minutes, I found that there were 335 Sabbath keepers by 1888. So we've only been here, started in 85, 6, 7, 8, 3 years we're talking. Their membership has gone up to Sabbath keepers 335 and 266 actual Adventist members in Australia, or in the colonial context here of Victoria. So it's growing, and it's growing fairly quickly. Maybe if I put the clicker down, I'll stop pressing that instead of the computer. Then a couple of other things happened very quickly. Would you believe, 1892, so they've only been here 7 years, and they started the first training school. It was in St Kilda, not Avondale. A few years later, they shifted up to there, but there in St Kilda, they started the St Kilda Road Bible School to prepare workers to go out. That's pretty good, start when you stop and think of it, of actually having a training college. And you may remember the story that I told the children here about the first camp meeting in Brighton, and about the angel over her tent, the protection that Ellen White had, and the policeman who, had that, in the end, a conversion experience because he wanted to go and see this woman who had the angel over her tent. And it was through that eventually he became a Seventh-day Adventist too. But the college students from St Kilda Road Bible School were the ones who were patrolling the ground there in 1894 now for the campground at Brighton. And then, of course, by the mid-1890s, so I couldn't get the exact date on this, but by the mid-1890s, the Adventist population in colonial Victoria was around the 1,000 mark. 10 years. That's not bad growth. What helped this growth? What really became the factors that helped the growth? The first, one other one here was the North Fitzroy Church. 1896 was the first official church to be built and dedicated in, I think it was August of that month. And I had a photo of the first SHF, which was a bakehouse in Northcote, but don't worry about that. So here we are, what we're looking at today. Today I want to have a look at, we've been talking about this rapid growth, and certainly we continue to see that, and there were significant events along the way that really promoted it, pushed it along quicker, and then it sort of slowed down again and pushed it along, etc. So what I'm looking at now is Adventism's arrival in the context of Melbourne's religious climate between 1885 and 1900. I have about and by the way, as I mentioned before, this is all coming out of an essay I did many years ago when I was down in Melbourne, and I was researching this and gathering all this information, and I really did enjoy, in fact, I enjoyed looking again at the examiner's mark after he gave me a distinction for it, and saying that this is the beginning of your master's, essay or assignment. Thesis is the word I'm looking for. And I thought, no, I got a better idea than that. And I went off on another idea and I bogged down, and another story. All right. But I did enjoy going to research and information outside of our regular Adventist books and into the Age, for example, in Melbourne, getting information about the first camp meeting and so on, and Ellen White. And lots of this information has come from other books that have really helped me with this information. The first thing that I want you to notice is this. When Adventists turned up in Melbourne in 1885, Melbourne was predominantly evangelical Christianity. The highest attendance or the largest church was the Church of England, today known as the Anglican Church, or if you're in America, called the Episcopal Church. And then following that, I think it was the Christadelphians came in second, and then the Roman Catholic Church, and then probably every other Protestant church that you can think of that came out of the Reformation, particularly out of the English Reformation, had a part of the Melbourne religious community. All right. So while the Catholic Church was second in number, it was primarily a Protestant community that the Adventist Church was having to deal with and break into. And it has always been shown that it's much easier to break into a Protestant community than it is into a Catholic community with the Adventist message. And maybe that was one of the things that these early pioneers recognised as a bit of a leading of the hand of God here. The next thing that becomes obvious, when we start talking about just general history for Victoria, there's the gold rush of the latter part of the 19th century. So that by the time the Adventists arrive in 1885, the church is actually quite wealthy. It's building big edifices, putting in great big pipe organs and making these. And if you go down to Melbourne today and look at all the big churches, it's during this period that they were being built, and the sense of permanency. And here came along a little bunch of people talking about Jesus is coming very soon and it's all going to be scrapped. Didn't go down too well, did it? But it did with some, as we see as we go along in this story. Some people began to realise, hey, maybe we've gone too far in what we're doing as far as the church is concerned. The next point is that there was a migration of the middle class around this time from the inner suburbs to the outer suburbs. Would you like to know what the outer suburbs were? I've listed some down here, for example, Richmond, North Fitzroy, Hawthorn. These were the outer suburbs, Doncaster. And this is where the middle class was migrating out. And it's interesting to notice that this suited very well the Adventist people who came in reaching out to the middle class. The very first converts were a coach builder, printers, and people who had means became members of the Adventist Church as they also became a part of those outer suburbs as it was. All right, another factor that's significant here is that this is the time when the influence of liberal theology and secularisation began to take place in the Christian community generally. Liberal theology from Europe and from the USA, questioning some of the things that were always seen as just orthodox, and who would ever think to challenge them? The authority of the scriptures, the interpretation of the scriptures, etc. All these big questions were beginning to be questioned and undermined in liberal theology. Now that began to shake a lot of people. And where do you go from here? If I can't believe in the authority of the Bible as a sounding board, not a sounding board, as just a pillar in the Protestant churches. If I can't believe in the authority of the Scriptures, then where do we go? And so it meant that as a result of the liberal theology and also secularism was creeping into the church was becoming more secular, and a lot of people got disenchanted with that. For example, I'm quoting here from Phillips, who is not an Adventist author. He says, for example, there were concerns that Protestants were becoming lax in their attitudes towards the Sabbath, travelling on trains on Sunday and taking Sunday excursions into the country or around the harbour or the bay, or they were using Sunday for secular pastimes such as visits to the museums and the libraries or art galleries, where pictures might not always be edifying. And so it goes. Can you see what was happening? Things were changing. And this meant that a lot of people started to look elsewhere at the time when Adventists were putting up their hand with their message, and a conservative message. Of course, Methodists, they got particularly shattered with this approach, etc. The next point I've got is evangelical churches become involved in evangelism. Because they were losing now members, they got involved in evangelism, and guess what kind of evangelism it was? They even started using tents that Adventists were wanting to use, and they used tents. So that wasn't seen as being, a circus. No, we're all using tents. And public halls, etc., were used for evangelism, and that became, the Adventists slotted in to the picture there very well. All right? And I'm moving quickly because I do want to spend just a tiny bit more time in the last one. There was a relaxing also of liturgical worship practices. Up to this time, I guess we would say that, the churches certainly, just let me see if I can pick up here. I thought this was interesting. No, it's back this page. No, I've lost it, doesn't matter. But the churches were, instead of liturgies and sort of even chanting, these things were giving way. Now, chanting, I guess we're saying mainly that would be in the Catholic Church, but the Protestant churches still had some very significant liturgies that they were beginning to relax, and worship became more free and open. And as a result of that, when the Adventists come along with a very relaxed worship style, again, they were feeling comfortable with the transition. So that's just another point that's worth noting. One of the interesting things is that Ellen White did not arrive with Original Party, but she did 6 years later in 1891. And you can very quickly appreciate that these people began to pick up, the community began to pick up, that Ellen White had prophetic status in the context of the Seventh Adventist Church. And how was that going to go? As a woman prophet in the church. That would that come across? Well, it's interesting, almost again, providentially, it's interesting to notice that here's where the Catholic Church had taken the lead. They had for centuries ordination of women in a role as nuns in the church, and so it was not an issue really for the Catholic Church, but in the Protestant churches, they had not really been promoting the role of women in the church up until this time, when suddenly we do find that the various churches began to become very involved in let's just say, for example, the Anglican answer was that to the Catholic women's orders was that they established Bethany in 1891, where deaconesses were trained. Sisters of the People were established by the Wesleyan Church, while the Presbyterians set up the Deaconess Order. One of the most prominent women's organisations was the Women's Christian Temperance Union, which began in the late 1880s. Notice the dates for all these things, all around the time when suddenly the Adventist Church turns up with a woman who's very much involved in the leadership of the church too. And it's interesting that this temperance society led by the women became a very, very powerful group in the late part of that century and moving into the beginning of the 20th century. And it was led by women, raised huge amounts of money. I mean, you can still find temperance halls that were established by these women. And here's something else. It says one particular liturgical change that was brought about by the women's WCTU was the introduction of grape juice instead of wine in the Lord's Supper. So they had a voice, and some changes took place, etc. So when it comes in, by the way, there were evangelist women that came to the fore during this time as well, and some women who became very significant writers in church history, Christian history, etc. They likewise were coming to the fore at this stage. So you can now appreciate this made it easier for the Adventists who have Ellen White with a high leadership status in the Adventist church. All right? And she was here for a decade and was quite influential in Melbourne initially, later moved to Cooranbong. Lastly, my last point that I would like to share with you is that the Adventist influence in public recognition of God. Now, what's public recognition of God? Coming up to Federation, there was a lot of debate in the 1890s about what the Constitution was going to be. And the churches began to look at this and say, look, we need more recognition. We need to be linked more with government and to be able to get government help and to get government support, etc., for where we are going to be able to hold the banner up, etc., in Australia. Now, linked with that, of course, there were other things as well that became a recognition of public, the public recognition of God. For example, they were pushing for such things as prayers in Parliament and at important gatherings, have prayer. Well, that's okay. We'd be supportive of that. But the Adventist Church was not supportive of the idea of linking the church and state. And they pointed out very clearly that look at the history, look at the medieval period when church and state were linked together and all the tragedy and the spill out of that and persecution, etc. And then you don't have to go too far into British history to see the same thing. There were pockets of time that when the monarch or others linked with government power tried to control the religious scene as well, it always led to persecution and opposition. We have to be left free to support ourselves and not to be given that government support. And of course, linked with this also, if you did that and the main Christian churches united together in getting this recognition of God through in the Constitution, then what about Sabbath? You know, we're out on a limb. And the potential problem for that before it was appropriate. And so Adventists changed the day. How did change the day on this? In fact, I have three different authors that I've quoted here. Phillips, Brouard, and I think Ellie is the other one, if I remember right. Yeah, Richard Ellie and Walter Phillips. These are not Adventist writers, but it's from them that I've got this information. And they have made it very clear that the strongest support against public recognition for God in the Constitution, why it never got up and ran and came out in January 1, 1901, was because of the influence of the writing of the Adventist people. Our magazines, our Bible Echo that was circulated, because the Adventists had a huge mailing list. And they were sending out their periodicals, they were sending out their leaflets and things to all these people. And of course, as this was coming up closer to the time of the vote, etc., and getting the word out to the parliamentarians, they became very involved in mailing out articles and periodicals calling for religious liberty and giving the arguments for it, etc., etc. And so, guess what? When the actual vote was taken on the public recognition for God in the Constitution, it was rejected because of the influence of the Adventist preachers and the Adventist publications that were sent out to a wide community. I think that is the most significant and providential thing that happened with the Adventist church in this period of time. And there I will leave it, because it has come time, and I think we've probably adequately covered this. Just simply to say that, hey, when the church, the Adventist church, arrived in this country, providentially there were a lot of things that just cards fell into place in the right way, and that helped the spread of the Adventist church, and that initial growth benefited, I believe, from it. But I think we have a lot to thank God for also in the fact that these people who arrived here at this time had a definite sense of mission and sharing what they had with their community. Now the means have sort of changed. No one seems to take any notice of a science magazine put in the letterbox, or an article, written by somebody of a religious order these days. Rather, it seems to be the most influential way that we have of sharing with our community is through the lives we live and the conversations that we fall into with those within our own circles. And I believe that that's one area that we must continue to be very outreaching in our community, because we do have a message that has a wonderful content and a real blessing to the life of the believer.